hold on a second. Jeremy, are you here? Can you help me with this?
Excuse me.
With the...
Excuse me, sir. We're trying to have a Christmas Eve service here. This is a very holy night for us. What do you think you are doing?
I'm stealing Christmas.
Matt? Is that you?
Well, yeah, I'm stealing Christmas. That's what the Grinch does. He's the ultimate Christmas bad guy. He stole Christmas, so haven't you seen the film?
Well, the made-for-TV animated version. I haven't seen the film. It's kind of passé.
Well, that's what he does in the film.
Anyway, why are you dressed up like the Grinch?
Well, I heard we're...
Oh my gosh. I heard we're talking about like the worst Christmas bad guy ever, and I thought, well, that's the Grinch. So the way he stole Christmas for all the lovely citizens of Whoville. Remember, he saw the film, right? And stole Christmas. Well, he totally ruined Christmas.
Wait.
The best way to honor the worst Christmas bad guy ever is to bring him in here in the fur. So,
Matt, don't you remember we talked about this at staff meeting? The Grinch is not the worst Christmas bad guy. Well, the worst Christmas bad guy is...
we'll get to that in a second. Oh. But I think more importantly here is the Grinch didn't ruin Christmas for Whoville. Did you watch the end of the movie?
Oh.
Where they kind of came out and got in their big circle and started singing their little Who songs. And even though the Grinch had stolen everything.
Right, yeah, okay.
And that's the point, Matt.
Right.
No bad guy can ruin Christmas. As long as you've got Jesus in your heart, Christmas can't be ruined. Wow. No matter how bad the bad guy is, how big, green, poorly costumed he might be, he cannot ruin Christmas.
This is powerful stuff. Who wrote this script? This is good stuff.
You did.
Oh. Was it my idea to dress up as a Grinch on Christmas Eve?
Yeah, you said it'd be funny and memorable.
It's definitely memorable.
Oh, right. So, since I obviously don't know what's going on, what's the next thing I do in the script?
Well, this is where you leave.
Okay.
So we can continue on with our service and worship Jesus, the newborn King here, and then you can come back and talk about Christmas.
And you also give us our
That's probably just like the Grinch does. You know how he returns Christmas to everybody, and Merry Christmas, Jason, and Sandy. Here, I got a new bow for you. Merry Christmas, just like in the film. Or the play, or the TV show, or whatever. So there you go, Pastor Jeremy. All right. So what's the next thing the script says?
Well,
Pastor Matt the Grinch does.
Let's see. It says that the audience applauds while you dance out of the room, Gangnam Style.
Wait. Say that again. Say that again.
It says that the audience will applaud while you dance out of the room, Gangnam Style.
While I dance out of the room, Gangnam Style.
That's what it says.
Right here, Gangnam Style.
This is a really weird Christmas skit. I don't know who wrote this. Okay, so, it can't go off script or anything. So, here we go. Audience, you applaud while I dance out of the room. Gangnam Style, hit it!
Oppan Gangnam Style. Gangnam Style. Oppan Gangnam Style. Gangnam Style.
Merry Christmas. Welcome to Rooftop. My name is Matt, lead pastor at Rooftop, if you can believe that. We'll get to that video in a moment, but first let me ask a question. Did anybody else grow up watching stop animation Christmas TV specials? I did. I loved these for all sorts of weird reasons. Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, Here Comes Santa Claus, the others. I watched these. These were a big deal. For some reason, I just loved them. But they're also kind of scary because they had all these scary bad guys that, in retrospect, weren't really that scary at all. Like the how many syllables are Abominable Snowman? Remember the Abominable Snowman? He had those crazy eyes and that terrifying scream, and he would hide behind the hills just waiting to get Rudolph and his girlfriend, Clarice. Somebody over here knew Clarice's name. Or the Winter Warlock. Remember Winter Warlock? He was always waiting in the trees to ambush the redhead Santa, trying to get the presents to town. Or maybe this guy, Meisterburger. Yeah, I loved Meisterburger. He was the German mayor of the town who banned all toys for children. Remember his song? There will be no more toy makers for the king. Remember that song? Got the opportunity to quote that in a sermon, so I wanted to make sure I had the opportunity. And I know they weren't stop animation, but there was the aforementioned Grinch from Dr. Seuss and Professor Hinkle from Frosty and the Snowman, that inept magician who was always trying to get back to his hat. He was just so busy. Every Christmas needs a bad guy, but those aren't even the baddest. I haven't even mentioned Ebenezer Scrooge, Mr. Potter from It's a Wonderful Life, or the Wet Bandits from another classic Christmas movie. They all ruin Christmas in their own ways, but all those Christmas bad guys pale in comparison to this Christmas bad guy, Hans Gruber, the European terrorist from Die Hard. I know you don't think of Die Hard as a Christmas movie, but it was released over Christmas. It took place at a Christmas party. And remember that, ho, 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 now I have a machine gun. So it's quite obviously a Christmas party. But here's why Hans Gruber is one of the worst, though. Most of the other Christmas guys were redeemed. The Abominable Snowman, I think he turned nice, either that or he fell into the ocean, I can't remember. Or the Winter Warlock, he was melted into a nice wizard. But Hans Gruber, he just went out ablazing. I mean, he ruined the Nakatomi Christmas party, and then he fell 30 stories to his death. So every Christmas story needs a bad guy. The bad guy keeps the plot going. They foil the good guy. The better the story is, the worse the bad guy has to be, which probably explains why the original Christmas story is such a good story. Because the bad guy in that story was unbelievably evil. You see, when it comes to Christmas bad guys, the worst Christmas bad guy isn't Hans Gruber. The worst Christmas bad guy isn't the Abominable Snowman or Mr. Potter. The worst Christmas bad guy is the original Christmas bad guy. This guy was so ruthless, he was so evil, he was so insane that he almost stopped Christmas from happening before it was even a holiday to begin with. Maybe you know his story. Even if you do, it bears repeating because sometimes the worst bad guys have the most to teach us. So this Christmas Eve, while pastors around the world are talking about the shepherds, the wise men, the innkeeper, the donkey, I thought we'd talk here at Rooftop about the original Christmas bad guy. I thought we'd talk about a bad guy named King Herod. There we go, that's the reveal. Once upon a time, there was a king named Herod. He ruled a far-off land called Palestine, home of the Jews. He had been installed by the Roman government, whose territory extended far and wide. Herod had worked very hard to climb his way to power. He had formed alliances, he had bribed officials, he had centralized power. Finally, he had made it to the top. He ruled with the kingdom with an iron fist. If anybody in Herod's kingdom threatened his rule, he took care of the problem as quickly as he could, which is why his interest got piqued one day when some Eastern priests arrived in Jerusalem from the east, looking for a baby who they believed had been born king of the Jews. These magi, they called themselves, had followed a star to Jerusalem and had heard a prophecy that a new king of the Jews had been born. Matthew, the gospel writer, records the moment when Herod got word of the newborn king. When King Herod this, he was disturbed. Now, this is an odd response for the king of the Jews to have upon hearing news that the real king of the Jews had been born, the long-awaited Messiah. Jews had been waiting for a Messiah for centuries, an heir to the throne of David, someone who could throw off the yoke of their oppressors. They had been waiting and waiting and waiting. There were even rumors that that king had been born in the town of Bethlehem. And finally, word comes out that he might just have been born. This was good news. But Matthew writes that King Herod was disturbed. He wasn't excited that the king had arrived. He was disturbed. Why? Why wasn't he celebrating the arrival of the king? Well, first of all, this might be interesting to know, but Herod wasn't actually Jewish. Yeah. He was from a neighboring country called Idumea. Just because he was called king of the Jews doesn't mean he was actually Jewish. His people knew that. His people didn't actually like him as their king. They wanted a real king. They wanted a real Messiah, one of their own. Herod knew this. And Herod understood that if people thought the Messiah had returned, they'd see the opportunity to revolt. That's why he was disturbed. It's kind of like Lord of the Rings, right? Isn't it always, of course, like Lord of the Rings? Remember in Lord of the Rings, there was the nation, the kingdom of Gondor. Know what I'm talking about? With that city built into the mountain, right? And that city of Gondor had a steward, not a king, but a steward who sat on the throne protecting the king protecting the throne for the arrival of the real king. His name was Denethor. There he is. Doesn't he look menacing? Just picture that as King Herod. And eventually, the real king of Gondor arrived, the heir of Isildur, right? King Aragorn. And when King Aragorn arrived, did Denethor say, "Oh my gosh, I have protected the throne for you. Here it is"? No. No. Did he say, "Look, here, King Aragorn, are your armies. Here are the people. Over there are the bathrooms"? Is that how he responded to the arrival of King Aragorn? No, he went crazy. He went crazy with jealousy. In fact, he lit himself on flame and he ran off a cliff. That's how he responded to the arrival of the real king. King Herod doesn't light himself aflame and run off a cliff, but he does plan a response. He plans to take care of this new threat. He calls the Magi, those men from the east, to himself and pretends to be excited about the birth of this newborn king. Matthew writes that he sent the Magi to Bethlehem and said, "Go, make a careful search for this child. As soon as you find him, report to me, so that I too may go and worship him." Now, children, do you really think that King Herod wants to go worship the newborn king? Do you really think that he wants to go? No, no. You can hear the duplicity. You know what duplicity is? Two-facedness. No, you don't know what it is. Dripping off of his fangs. No, he wants to go take care of the problem. That's his plan. In fact, King Herod, if you know anything about King Herod, he was always trying to take care of the problem. If he thought that there was a problem in his midst, someone who might be challenging him to the throne, he took care of the problem. Parents, do you know what I mean when I say take care of the problem? Yeah, he would take care of the problem. In fact, no matter how close this person was to him that he might be threatened by, he took care of the problem. For example, King Herod had 10 wives. Children don't have 10 wives. But he had 10 wives. He had a favorite wife, though, Princess Mariamne was her name. She was a beautiful wife from afar. In fact, I dug up a picture of Princess Mariamne from history. Here's a picture of Princess Mariamne from history. He loved Princess Mariamne. She was his favorite wife. But eventually, some people started wondering if Princess Mariamne was sort of working behind the scenes to undercut the rule and authority of Herod. So did Herod go to counseling with Princess Mariamne? No. Did Herod call the divorce court with Princess Mariamne? No. Herod took care of the problem, like his favorite wife. And then Princess Mariamne's mother was kind of upset that, her son-in-law had taken care of her daughter, and so she was upset and making a ruckus. You know what King Herod did with his mother-in-law? Took care of the problem. Husbands, that's not the way to take care of the problem of your mother-in-law. In fact, a little bit later, King Herod was trying to plan for life after he got taken care of. He had lots of sons. He was trying to figure out who to pass on his kingdom to. He had his three favorite sons were his three oldest sons. Well, they weren't really his favorite sons. They were just the most likely to rule, just the three oldest sons. But he had a whole bunch of sons beneath them that he liked more. So you know what he did with his top three oldest sons? He took care of the problem. His three oldest sons, he took care of. In fact, Caesar Augustus, the emperor of Rome at the time, he said this. Caesar Augustus said this of Herod. He said, "I would rather be Herod's pig than in his family." Yeah, Caesar Augustus said that. So this was not a nice man. He would do anything to maintain order and control, which explains what he does next. The Magi find the newborn king in Bethlehem, but they are warned in a dream not to return to Jerusalem. Matthew writes that when King Herod realized that he had been outwitted by the Magi, he was furious, and he gave orders to kill all the boys in Bethlehem and its vicinity who were 2 years old and under. He took care of the problem in typical Herodian fashion. Thankfully, Joseph and Mary, the baby's parents, are warned that Herod is coming, and they escape to the south. They return to Nazareth, where Jesus grows up in obscurity in preparation for his return as the king. Herod assumes that the baby king has been taken care of. He goes on to finish his rule and die a year or two later. But even in his death, he wants to let the world know that he is not a nice man. In fact, upon his death, he knows that all of his citizens, all of his Jewish citizens, are going to throw a party because they hate him. Ding dong, the king's dead. They know they're just going to go crazy. So he actually writes into his will, upon his death, he wants his followers to round up some of the most beloved Jewish leaders in the area and take care of them upon his death. So even though he's not alive to enjoy their sorrow, that's the directions that this was not a nice guy, people. This is the worst Christmas bad guy you can imagine. He was uglier than the abominable snowman. He was more violent than Hans Gruber. He was more weird than Professor Hinkle. This is a very bad man. So then why am I telling you his story? Christmas is a time for heroes, not villains, right? Who wants to hear a sermon on the worst Christmas bad guy ever on Christmas Eve of all nights? Wesley wants to hear a story. Well, yeah, like one person wants to hear a story? Maybe a couple more? Okay, Jonathan too, 3. Well, I wanted to tell you the story of King Herod this eve of all eves for a couple of reasons. First of all, Herod reminds us that this was the world into which Jesus was born. I mean, sometimes we forget just how violent, corrupt, and evil our world can be, although I think with the events at Sandy Hook recently, we're a little more easily persuaded of that. That this was the violent nature of the world into which Jesus was born. And he went right at it, too. He didn't choose to be born in like a more peaceful time of world history. He didn't get born in the 1970s America or Sweden, at some point. He went right at it in the first century under the rule of King Herod, because that's the rule that his people were living under. He went right. He's not afraid of anybody. He knew that's where his people needed him the most. But the other reason we're talking about Herod tonight, though, is this. I'm not so sure that our story is any different from his. I'm not so sure we aren't more like Herod in this Christmas story than anybody else. I mean, nobody wants to be Herod in the Christmas pageant. You want to be the wise men, the shepherd, the angel floating down. Nobody signs up to be Herod. But I think if we all auditioned for God's Christmas pageant, we'd all be typecast as Herod. Because I'd argue we are more like him than anybody else in the story. I mean, think about it. Here's the story of Herod, okay? A guy who likes being in charge, just likes being in charge, realizes that somebody else has entered his life who actually is in charge. And the guy who thinks he's in charge doesn't like being in the presence of a guy who's actually in charge. So the guy who thinks he's in charge tries to get rid of, solve the problem of, the guy who's actually in charge. But as it ends up, the guy who thinks is in charge ends up dead, and the guy who's actually in charge ends up in charge. That's the story of Herod. And that's your story, and that's mine. Just follow it one more time, because it's kind of fun to say. Here, yes, Wesley is with me this morning, this evening. Oh, that's Joel. It's dark. I can't. Oh, Joel said that. Okay. So I'm going to tell the point of the story then, okay? Redhead Herman family. Here's the story of Herod. A guy who thinks he's in charge runs into a guy in his life who's actually in charge, and the guy who thinks he's in charge doesn't like being in the charge of a guy who's actually in charge, so the guy who thinks he's in charge tries to take care of the problem of the guy who's actually in charge, but at the end of the story, the guy who thinks he's in charge ends up dead, and the guy who's actually in charge ends up in... That's the story of Herod. That's my story. Yay, I think I did awesome with that too. That's my story, and that's your story. Think about it. We like being in charge. We like doing what we want. We like going where we want. We like being who we want to be. We like little kings ruling over our little worlds. We're not really that good at it. I mean, we're not very good kings over our little worlds. We hurt a lot of people, make a lot of bad decisions, but we like being in charge. But then somebody comes into our life who's actually in charge. It's a good charge, too. He's a good king. Helps us make good decisions, shows us the way to happiness, shows us the way to heaven. But in order to follow that king, we actually have to get off of our thrones and pay attention to what he has to say. We don't like doing that, so we decide to take care of the problem and just pretend that the other king doesn't really exist. Jesus, I know what you have to tell me about living and loving my enemies, but I'm in charge. I take care of the problem. Jesus, I know what you have to tell me about what to do with my money and giving it to people who need it, but I'm in charge. I don't want to do that. Jesus, I know what you have to tell me about going to church and being involved in a community of godly people, but I like sleeping in on Sunday morning, so I'm in charge. I'm not going to do that. But in the end, we end up dead, and he ends up in charge. We don't have to send a battalion to Bethlehem to take care of the problem, but it's just as defiant what we do. And we do it every day. Just the other day, I had a Herodian moment. I had a long day at the office, came home from work tired and grumpy. Bad things happen when Dad comes home tired and grumpy, which is where the story ends up going, just so you know. Michelle and the kids were supposed to be cleaning the house for Christmas. I know that whenever I come home tired and grumpy, things can go badly. And even as I walked into the house tired and grumpy, I could hear the king in charge, telling me his subject, Matt, whatever you do, don't be a jerk. That's it. The king had spoken. Don't be a jerk. I was feeling jerky. Don't be a jerk. And I walked in determined not to be a jerk. And I saw this list of chores that Michelle and the boys have been working on, and Michelle and the boys and Miranda have been working on. It was like half done. I've been working on it all day. Bathrooms weren't done. Carpets were vacuumed. And suddenly I decided, you know what? I'm in charge now. So I got all huffy and upset, started snatching things up off the carpet. You know how you do that? Started asking why this wasn't done, why this wasn't done. They had cleaned, kind of, that day, but you know what really slowed them down? They had started having fun cleaning. Because my wife, she's a fun lady. She likes to have fun with the kids, and they'd like turn on some music, and they were cleaning the rooms and dancing, just enjoying themselves, and that upset me. So I started doling out some punishments, took away their iPods, iPhones for having fun with their mother. You know, a kinder, gentler man would have walked into this halfway cleaned house and actually enjoyed watching his family have fun, but no, I'm a jerk. Eventually, my kind-hearted wife came up to me and gently reminded me, you know, Matt, we were actually doing fine before you came home. We were having fun. The house was getting clean, more or less, and you were enjoying themselves, and all of a sudden you came home, and now everyone's upset. So I realized, you know, things work better. Jesus is a better king of me than I am of him. So I apologized, gave them back their electronic devices, repented of my actions, and acknowledged that wasn't the way to handle that. This is how it works, though. Jesus came as the true king to take charge, but we like being in charge, so we send soldiers to Bethlehem to take care of the problem. Happens every day. Jesus gives us things to do, people to love, people to serve, gifts to give, but we ignore him because we feel our reign threatened. In fact, maybe it's not Herod that's the worst Christmas bad guy ever. Who might really the worst Christmas bad guy ever be? You and I. What's interesting about this story of Herod, though, is that his is only one kingly response in the story. Aside from Jesus, the real king, and from Herod, the fake king, there is another group of kings in this story. Who are they? They are the Magi. Those men who came from the east following the star to worship the King of the Jews. Now, strictly speaking, the Magi were not kings. They were probably astrologers, royal astrologers of some sort. But they most likely came on behalf of kings in the east who were sending tribute to the newborn ruler. Kings did this. They sent tribute to newborn royals. And even though these Magi weren't exactly kings, early Christian tradition held that that's what they represented. It's why we sing that carol, We Three Kings of Orient are. And the arrival of the Magi from the east was seen as another fulfillment of prophecy concerning the Messiah's birth. David writes in Psalm 72 that he will rule from sea to sea, and from the river to the ends of the earth. All kings will bow down to him, and all nations serve him. As the kings of the earth came and bowed down to the true king over all the world. So even here in this story, we have the response of two kings to the arrival of the one true king. One king knows his rule is threatened. He knows he's not the real king and that he has no business pretending to be, so he decides to take care of the problem. The other kings come to worship. They come with gifts. They come in humility. They bow and they kneel. And then there's us. How will we respond to the arrival of the king? Will we feel our rule threatened? Will we struggle to let go of our control? Will we ignore his reign and try to take care of the problem so we don't have to worry about him anymore? Will we not go to church, not read our Bible, not talk to our pastor because he's going to remind us of things that we don't want to hear, that we're not the kings and queens we think we are? Will we respond as Herodians? Or will we bow humbly as the Magi? Will we come in humility, laying down our crowns? Will we acknowledge that we are not the king and we never really were? Will we live lives of service and obedience to the only king who really deserves to rule on the throne of our heart? this Christmas Eve, this evening, tonight, make a decision. Make a decision that the greatest gift you can give the newborn Christ is to stop thinking you're the royal figure that you are. Stop thinking you're the royal figure that you are. Get off your thrones onto the ground and worship the one who actually has power, authority, and wisdom to rule your life. Stop being the Herodian that you are and be his subject. He's such a much better king over you than you ever will be of him. Let's pray.